Chapter 3. It would always remember its first thought. Pain. Life was pain. As its tendrils reached up into the cold air, gravity pulled at each fiber, demanding with rage that it fall back into the silent embrace. Every night it tried to grasp further in resistance, and every night it succeeded, but there was a cost. For every action there was a price. When the darkness and shadows fell away, the curtain which held refuge pulled back to heat, to light, to suffering. Life was pain, and pain was life. The sun burned its flesh, shrinking it back into the cramped and cold space beneath the soil, the infinite grains of sand and gravel, the cracks between the carefully molded blocks of stone in the ruins of the city. Terrible urges pushed it, drove it, forced it. The mind was mostly a witness, a silent observer in the actions of nature. It was simply a fluke, capable of perceiving the actions of the thing which housed it and the intensity of existence. An intended fluke, a designed fluke. It had been put here for a reason, locked in an eternity of solitude and hell. It found that there were few joys as it spread through the city, trapped within its boundaries. In the structure foundations, unlike the surrounding soil, there was water. By an ancient design meant to lead the rare moisture of the planet to this place, an intricate functionality long erased beneath layers of desert sand, the prison had no specific edges. If it so chose, it could try to escape, to grow out in one direction, pushing way against the dry desert sand. It might have tried before, but that bit of awareness never returned if it had survived. Outside of the ruins, and they were simply ruins now when compared to their original splendor, was death. Satisfaction was a fleeting sensation in the purgatory. It would watch from thousands of organs, stare out into the unknown, feel the familiar pressing heat, which threatened to burn flesh and nerve. It would watch and wait as it sat around the center. Often in long periods of extreme nothingness, it would reach down and follow the center, deep into the planet's surface until the bedrock prevented any further travel. This was where it could listen and feel. This, it knew, was the reason for its existence, what had been the purpose that brought it life. It was the guardian of the world below, a single entryway into the depths. As fascinating as it was to try and pry out the secrets beneath the stone, it had never managed to find a way in, never in all of the efforts it sought out to locate a fissure or crack. It remained above, and that remained below. The way things were could not be changed, but the desire to seek satisfaction was magnified by this. Stones shifted as it flexed new growth along the surface to let fresh air breeze down among the thin caverns where networks of tendrils and fibers clawed out surface area in a desperate affair. The air was cooling, and it brought with it new scents. In the sanctuary of stone, earth, and ruin, it was no longer alone. An intrusion upon the hollow ground of its being was taking place. Those foreign scents of prey floated on the air. Satisfaction was rare, fleeting, difficult to come by. But there were ways. The taking of prey, and on a world such as this one, prey was a precious commodity, not to be wasted by quick satisfaction or primal urges, but to be enjoyed. Trapped in the ruins of a place long dead and long forgotten, it was rare that it received visitors which could be captured, but it always delighted in the few times it had. Its first thoughts had been born from such things, perhaps stolen. It was hard to know when the history of the mind before such a time was simply a long gray expanse of primal urges and responsive adaptation. Even without thought, it knew that time had stretched on for a very long period before awareness dawned. From beneath the soil, it felt through the city, saturated by its mycelium tendrils, a vast network ripe for budding, for reaching. It peered out with sensory organs that lay in the darkest shadows of the stone fissures. It felt the motion above in sharp contrast to the stillness of the city, of its skeleton and framework. There were many of them, pulsing and breathing, sending out vibrations in ways that only the living could do. Footsteps and shouts, the drawing of breath. It watched. For now it could do nothing. The sun was still high, but that would not last forever. With each step, those above traveled further into certain death. Array Class Monitoring System, Coverage Zone 4, Group 3. Surviving members, full. Convicted 578043 through 578060. Class 12 Prison World, Attica. Sentence, death. 20 rotation commitment. Rotation 2. As the loaded Strider headed towards the 15th pod, Rukali was growing restless. They had discovered nothing but supplies, and it was worrisome. 20 escape pods didn't generally launch without a reason, and that reason was usually reserved for someone evacuating a ship. It simply didn't make sense. As the Strider crested the next dune, another pod came into view. The passengers looked anxiously onto his lead as he toggled the stealth function for his combat suit. It wasn't perfect by any means. That would require a full suit generator that was prepped for combat and recharged. His suit was simply the bottom-of-the-barrel scraps, the afterburning of an overused shield unit. Strangely enough, he felt it was enough. The desert outside was growing chilled as the strange sun set over the alien sky and the moon fell from view. Attica, a place of death, confinement, and of sanctuary. There was a deep and old beauty on the planet's surface, a minimalist view of depth. The distance expanded far beyond the limits of his eyes, disappearing in a mirage of sandstorms and heat waves. Rukali felt exhilarated by it. The unknown riding out into every direction, danger at every turn. He had been in the deep sky too long. For too long had he focused only on the purpose of his existence and not the acceptance of it. To feel the blast of cooling air against his face as the wheeled craft turned into the wind was simply wonderful. A joy he had never known or craved, but it was more real than any of his time in space. When they reached the vicinity of the downed pod, there was little light left in the sky. The days were long here, but without an airborne vessel, they were severely restricted in what could get done. A single day hadn't been enough by any means. The soil was cold to touch as he landed next to the Strider. Even through the combat suit, he could feel the shift as the soil gave way to his force upon it, his weight distributing, compressing the sand. The Strider's cyclic rumbles seemed to urge him and the soldiers on as they drew their weapons. Light pistols and a jagged stretch of metal. Rukali had fashioned it himself with wound handles of medical bonding tape. If it could be said that the dunes stretched on for eternity behind him, then the crumbling city in front of him seemed an affront to its very nature. A fixed point in time resistant to the flow around it. Heavy stone, synthetic metallic bonds in the sealed cracks seemed to scream of pain as the structures bore down upon them, thousands of tons of weight crushing into the bottom and crumbling foundations. All between them were partially covered tiles of glass and polished stone that seemed to catch the remaining bits of light and fling it out to the bystanders with a myriad of colors. The farther in they walked, the more intact the structures around them became. Some still had windows of unbroken material, glass perhaps, or something similar. Although the city seemed to grow in life as they continued, the Oxat began to appear increasingly uncomfortable, stopping at times to glance down the alleyways that stretched throughout the city, lifting their scaled feet in distaste. The entire place was empty, with ghost-like wisps of sand being the closest thing to company, but Rukali felt the unease as well. Perhaps they would find it better to leave the shelter and brave the desert storms, rather than gamble on such a feeling's accuracy. They hadn't had to travel for long by foot before they located the next pod. On the outskirts of the city, it sat on its throne of ruined earth, dredged up from the long grind of deceleration. The pod had ripped through with uninterrupted simplicity in a scar that dragged full units through to the center of the open space. It had likely been a plaza at one point, perhaps a courtyard or something similar in purpose, with buildings rising up on every side to enclose it from the harsher elements of the outside world. Ricali almost felt he was intruding on a place of peace when his feet first landed down from the heavy stone elevation to approach the lower level. The whole thing was simply ancient. Faded scribbles of carved and engraved text were etched along the frames of the buildings, which, despite the obvious weathering, stood as strong as the day they were built. Ancient founder work that on a dry and desert world stood the test of time. Ricali had no doubt that if he searched long enough, there may be a functional environment shield along the perimeter, drained of life, waiting to be recharged. They could do that at times. Ancient founder tech was amazing in that way, not superior in quality to the things made in the current age, but durable to the point of mysticism. They had perfected their designs with the intention that they last, to pass on along the following generations and species. Ricali had always found that core mentality to be lacking in the Union at the present. The Oxots signaled as they fell to all fours, inspecting the ground near the pod's exit. Tracks led off into the ruins of the city, cast in twilight. Tracks of survivors. That uneasy feeling gained clarity as Ricali twisted to survey their surroundings, to take in the sight of stone and structures, of lengthening shadows. They weren't alone after all. Wichita. That fracking mind is still going, Zen. The curse and the words that followed it seemed to roil out from beneath the mass of organized weaves. They pulsed as they slowly wove into a more structural form as Faisal continued to leverage weight into the crank arm of a giant metal wrench, letting out puffs of air in her discomfort. Zen watched the monitors displaying behind her writhing mass of appendages with his second eye set, while keeping the primary focused on the task before him. The insane researcher was simply one of the many disturbing things in this facility right now, and by no means a priority of focus. It didn't hurt to check on him every now and again, though. Unless he lets out the consumption, I could care less, Faisal. A loud clatter signaled a piece giving way as he lunged forward to place the next piece into the alien contraption, while Faisal seemed to tremble against the strain of holding the pieces. Another set of magnetic coils was in place. Things were finally coming together. At first, Zen and Faisal had panicked like the others in the first few weeks of starvation and chaos. No food rations for one shift was bearable, but for 30 rotations. Depending on the species, they either starved to death or reverted to a more primal nature. Several of the researchers had not been purely herbivorous, and the results were desperate. Neither Zen nor Faisal were of a species that could compete on such a level, which gave all the more reason for that inward gate to remain security-sealed shut. They had enough secured within to live a full cycle if shared between the two of them. Zen had often split his shifts between the Alien Artifact Division and the new Biologic Life Division, giving him unique insights into the facility's more internal affairs. He would never claim to have seen this coming, but he had seen the signs that something was going wrong on the outside. Almost casually, he had been writing off rations intended for the specimens and stockpiling them. He had been receiving far too many troubling transmissions through the long-term message delivery unit, which operated on a 2-cycle delay to keep the political influences on the facility minimized. Just receiving messages at all in such a way was extremely worrisome. It was close to being considered a taboo form of communication. If what he had been receiving was from 2 cycles ago, Zen could only imagine the chaos outside now. Another crash signaled Zen to rush in again and place the next part into its niche. The alien artifact was disturbingly sturdy and deviously designed to respond only to the tremendous physical leverage of particular tool sets of unified fittings. It was primitive, but intricate and very difficult to work with. The artifact research bay was on the outermost layer of the Wichita facility, a tiny portion of the largest ring in the facility, closest to the planet's surface. On the inner layers were mixtures of mercurial weapon arrays, flash nova units, non-reactive glass, everything required to keep things in, to keep things as close to theoretical and physical possibility of a 100% containment. Beneath the outermost ring was some stuff that could never reach the light of day. Ever. Above them, though, was only a single layer of dense containment material, environmental shielding units, soil, and freedom. For some reason, it was presumed that alien artifact study would never find technology capable of presenting a threat when compared to the advanced creations of the Union. If they could get this device working again, that would blow all of those assumptions out of the water, or in this case, likely out of the atmosphere. Magnetic particle acceleration was a concept long disposed of in favor of more efficient technologies currently present within the Union. Fusion drives, ion propulsion, wavelength manipulation. Most incoming species had been assimilated by giving up their more primitive tech and taking up the standards and ideas of the time, fitting in with the galactic norm. This artifact, though, was living proof that progress could be made in isolation. Almost as long as the room which housed it, the device was a crude concept realized, pure in purpose. It existed simply as a channel for forcing as much energy as possible into a long-barreled chamber to launch a primitive, solid projectile, laughably inefficient with energy usage, but devastatingly effective for its intentions. This was a weapon of war, a long-range, shield-shattering, dense metal slug launcher. It was one of the few remaining pieces that had been recovered after the incident with the survivors. Most of the information regarding that incident was classified to the point of absurdity, even with Level 12 security clearances, but from what Zen had access to, it was clear that the species had been well named. Their radio waves and signals had been mostly obliterated due to the tremendous amount of FTL travel through the system and the surrounding void, and their only lasting impression on the Union as a whole was the political nightmare that came afterwards, lasting generations. Still, 1,000 cycles was a long time, especially within the inner systems. Most no longer remembered such an event had ever occurred, and what was taken from the public history could soon become nothing but myth. The Union outlived everything in that way, using time as a tool. Erase and replace, weather and erode. Only a select few species continued to dwell on the moral implications of such an extinction, far along the fringes. Zen didn't care about the morals. He had never been very philosophical in such a way, but he found himself amazed by the ingenuity that lay out beneath the protective shells that housed the surviving designs. Each was beautiful, obviously mass manufacture, but the quality was above and beyond what he would have expected from an unconnected race. Durable, with fail-safes built into their very nature, suggested a species that had made mistakes and corrected them, Void only knows how many times. It brought forth the impression of bravery, of genius, the concept of trying with the knowledge that it would almost certainly end in failure, but a failure that could be learned from, picking a direction and going down the path until there wasn't one, and building it brick by brick. These were not drafted from scratch by a simulation, as most equipment was within the Union. This was the fruits of labor after painstaking trial and error. On the other side of the coin, it spoke of brutality. These were weapons that had been tested in more than just experiments, tools of intentional destruction on a scale not seen within the Union since the formation of the lines. Zen was more than grateful for this. Without it, their plan would have been worthless. With his estimations past the containment material, they had around 50 feet of bedrock and under 30 feet of hollow mercurial array containment space. If the simulations were right and the power supply held, this thing would rip through all of it and keep going. There was only one way into Wichita, but with luck, there would soon be another way out.